So let me say hello and thank you for having me, and thank you. It's very nice to speak in front of people, especially about one of my favorite things, which is the military. And you did say before that there was only one NCO on the panel. However, that's not absolutely correct. I started off as a nose striper. I graduated from Massasoit Community College, and I lived in Walpole, Massachusetts, and went from there to my first assignment, which was at Lackland Air Force Base. So I started off as and I'll fast forward this because I have 30 years of things to go through. But I did make it to staff sergeant. And I tell the story to everybody. They say, well, why did you become an officer? Well, I tell them because I thought the staff sergeant test was hard enough and I wasn't going to do that again, so I'll become an officer because we don't necessarily get those kinds of tests. But they were tough. So anybody who makes it to rank in the enlisted force deserves every bit of the honor that they have. Those are hard things to do, and I have great appreciation and respect for that. I, on the other hand, decided to go back to college. One of the reasons that I did go in the military in the first place, which I think is important, is I came from a family of 7 brothers and sisters. And I was really the only person in my family that was in the military. My father stayed, just till they pushed him off the Korean Peninsula back into Japan, and then they came home. I did go in the military because from the beginning, since I was a young girl, I always felt that I wanted to be independent and I wanted to be treated equally. It's interesting that your basic freedoms, you think you learn them, but sometimes there's some basic freedoms that you're born with, and that was one of the things, is I wanted to be treated like everybody else got treated. And I felt that the military was the place where, regardless of whether I was male or female, that I was going to have the best shot at equality. And I'll talk a little bit about that because that does make a big difference. But I did go on to ROTC, and I did get my commission. I actually got a direct commission. I had to meet a board for the Medical Service Corps. I was a behavioral health specialist for the first 6.5 years. I had worked in a hospital, but more in an outpatient setting. This time, as a Medical Service Corps officer, I was in charge of the hospital, which was very interesting because very differently, people, when they saw me in 1978 and even into the 80s, when I would introduce myself and I would be walking generals and dignitaries around my facilities, they would say, oh, you're awful smart for a nurse. In which case I said, I'm not a nurse. I run this hospital. So it was very interesting, even in those times, I guess the stereotypes that go on with that kind of thing. So I started off as a second lieutenant, which is, again, the bottom ranks of the officer rank, and finally ended up in 2009 when I retired as a colonel. So in between all of that, I've been to a lot of different assignments, kind of moved every 2 years. The majority of my time I spent in Washington, D.C. I did have an assignment at the Pentagon. I did have an assignment overseas in Korea, which was, to me, one of the most beneficial assignments. They did not, until I was sent there, send second lieutenants, which was the lowest rank in the Air Force, to an overseas assignment. I was one of the first females to go to an overseas assignment, to go to that particular base in the Medical Service Corps. So I remember that the boss that I first worked for felt as though the Air Force was getting back at him by sending these, first of all, second lieutenants, and second of all, a female second lieutenant. So he thought for sure they were getting back at him. And ended up that I did very, very well in that assignment. I got an MSM, one of my first MSMs, Mandatory Service Medals, from that assignment because I had done so well there. But that, to me, is one of the best places I can explain to you what my career was all about. It was always a struggle. When you go to Korea, in particular, we were just starting to integrate the base there with new families coming in. And I think the males will sort of understand what I'm going to say here. So when I first got there had been no women there, no high-ranking women officers, and there was a lot of tomfoolery, I'm going to say, going on that base that a lot of us would not put up with, and decent women would not want to put up with. And so there was quite a change, a cultural change that had to take place on that base when I first got there. Now, being the independent woman that I was, one of the things that I saw was the American women that were there felt very uncomfortable the way the American men treated their new wives, which were Korean wives in a lot of cases. and it was a very dependent relationship. And it made the American women feel very uncomfortable. It made us go back in time, if you would. So I made sure that while I was there, every woman, I don't care what nationality they were, whether they were Korean, American, were going to be treated with respect, whether they wanted it or not, because, I mean, culturally, sometimes people don't believe they deserve that respect. But I said, this is the way it's going to be done. I had all of the paperwork translated into Korean so that they could understand the language. Prior to that, their husbands had to explain everything to them. Absolutely not. They were going to get the same privacy that everybody else. Bottom line of that is, not only did it make the American women feel more comfortable, they felt as though, there you go, you know, it changed the culture of the entire hospital. Some of the men were a little bit upset with me because they like the status quo, don't we all, but they like that. But that sort of was sort of a theme through my entire career. And I think any of these women, if you ask them along the line, was it a challenge to deal with that because you were female? I bet they'd all say absolutely. So right from the beginning, that was one of the themes that will go through my entire career. Even to this day, I speak a lot in many different places. I've been asked to speak, and I always speak on women veterans and women in military, and what my feelings are about women being in military, because I believe that it's very, very important for people to understand what we went through. That being said, it was very, very rewarding. I have no regrets. I got 2 master's degrees that the military paid for. I have a bachelor's degree. I did an internship at Johns Hopkins Medical Center that they paid for. I had a very, very, very rewarding career. One of the assignments I think that I enjoyed the most, that was a little bit different than running hospitals, is I worked for the Air Medical Evacuation System, which is those big white planes with the red crosses that fly around. They don't anymore. Now it's all gone to the reserves, but at the time I was an operator for I felt that's where I really felt most significant in terms of my support to the wartime environment. We had just started doing jumps, you know, with some of the Army folks, and a lot of the missions that were done were very top secret, but the medics knew, we knew, because when they have a jump, they always estimate the collateral damage to those individuals, which is one of the things about war that's just interesting and very, you know, cold, is, you know, if you have 600 guys jumping out of an airplane, how many of them are going to, you know, break their legs, how many of them are going to break their, they had calculations for all of these things, okay? It was never zero, I'm going to tell you right now, and sadly. So we always had to have a medical plane follow that kind of a mission and be ready to land and go in there and pick people up. I also got involved with transplants, which was really, really interesting, because we had C-21s that could fly all around the world and, you know, meet, you know, at one place and get, you know, get some of those parts out to people that really, really needed them. So it was always a rewarding feeling too for me to be able to feel that I saved a life, or maybe 1 or 2 or 3, which was very, very nice just by the job that I did. The other part is, you know, we do have a big aeromedical evacuation station at Andrews Air Force Base. It used to be Malcolm Grow Medical Center, and I started off at Malcolm Grow Medical Center and made sure that my last assignment was at Malcolm Grow Medical Center. So I finished my career, started out as an airman, finished it as a colonel. And one of the things I'll remember the most of that assignment, and then I'll pass it on to the next one, is there was a young man. I was up in the airplanes, one of the C-141s, and they would bring all of the people to Andrews, and then, you know, the Army would come in and pick up their folks, and the Navy from Bethesda would come in and pick up their folks. But I remember this one kid, and he had staples all down his arm, and I went to shake his hand. That's why I knew, and couldn't shake his hand because, you know, they were staples all down his arm. And he was so excited, and he showed me his helmet, and the helmet had a hole in it, or a little chip out of it, and he looked at me and he said, you know what? He said, this helmet saved my life. It saved my life, because obviously he got hit with a bullet in the head and in his arm. And I said, really? And he says, yeah. He says, but you know what? He said, I can't wait to go back there. I can't wait to go back there with my buddies. And I can't wait to heal really quickly. And so, to me, I try to tell this story because that's the essence of what we do. That's the essence of why I went in the military. not necessarily, I didn't understand why I went in the military, but that's why I stayed, okay? Because it's that sort of attitude and that sort of dedication, that sort of experience that a young kid goes through that no one will ever understand. And I have great respect for the military, great respect for my military career, great respect for anybody that chooses to do it. I had a son that went in the Army. He also went to Bagram. That was probably the hardest year of my life, knowing that he was in Bagram. But if they called me today, I'd be packing and going right now. That's how much I loved my military experience. So thank you for having me again, and thanks for listening to me.